You hear that? That is the sound of a film score. A piece of music written, composed and played, not with the intent of being the next hit single on the radio or a standalone commercial success, but written to be part of a larger cinematic experience. I've always had this excessive fascination when it comes to music. Not that I really cared much for the technical, mathematical or terminological craftsmanship. No, what I was captivated by was how those peculiar sounds affected me so much. I remember hearing songs in the background of commercials or movies, and I would spend hours at my parents' desktop trying to find the music that was used. Needless to say, I couldn't listen to a good song and just move along. I think it's a shame that music is not getting more validation today than it actually is. It's funny when you think about the fact that before dialogue was even capable of being recorded onto film, music was there. It's been a huge part of cinematic storytelling ever since the dawn of the medium. And yet it is being neglected. Some people even say that it should be unnoticeable, that it should stay in the background. I personally think this is atrocious. I think music is capable of doing so many things, and when it is good, it is galaxies beyond just your typical background noise. So I'm going to do my best here to express my perception of how music affects me. This is my tribute to anime scores and soundtracks. Let's begin with atmospheric and mostly subtle pieces that amplifies emotion and mood, more so than drives the narrative. This is music that's somewhat expected to be in whatever anime it is in. It is done by using genres and instruments that are commonly associated with the setting of the story, or at the very least, it doesn't distract heavily from it. The biggest obstacle here is that this is the easiest type of soundtrack to become generic and therefore forgettable. Thankfully, there are soundtracks that manage to be memorable even when they are conceptually expected. There is the smooth jazz in Baccano. The childlike, playful pieces in Usagi Drop. The grand, epic and royal compositions in Fate Zero. The psychedelic, cerebral sounds of Paprika. One that really nails it is Studio Ghibli's Joe Hisaishi. Movie after movie, he brings memorable and beautiful scores, yet never leaves the expected emotion. You know that the next work of his is not gonna include heavy guitar riffs or electronic synth. The success of this, besides him being an amazing musician and composer, stems from the fact that he always manages to come up with very distinct melodies that sort of levitates over the scores. It's a nice way of giving your audience a hook that they can associate with the movie. Like when you hear this, you know that it is Spirited Away. When you hear this, you know that it's Princess Mononoke. We move along to the opposite of a conventional soundtrack, where the music goes against whatever associations we may have. The unconventional soundtrack does not share the same risk of blandness that the conventional does, because even if the music is not especially unique, the audience will still notice it because of how it defies expectations. The biggest risk here is the fact that sometimes the music simply just doesn't end up fitting with the story, and it ends up being too distracting. It's a game of high risk, high reward, and oh boy is the reward high. It's Berserk's heavy-hitting synthetic beats. It's the hip-hop, rap and R&B tunes of Samurai Champloo. . It's the upbeat, hyped rock and strings arrangements that makes even high school sport anime feel like epic war battles. Music in an anime becomes an indicator when the director wants to draw the viewer's attention to something very specific or to point out that something important is going on. It is commonly done to alarm the audience, which happens often in horror or thriller settings. But I personally love it when it feels like the director is thinking, oh yeah, I know what's happening here now is really awesome. Take this scene from Death Note where Yagami Soichiro has driven a truck straight into a TV building to stop the broadcasting of Kira's tape to prevent Kira from gaining more public support. After succeeding, he is contemplating how he can leave the building without letting Kira ever seeing his face. That is when Detective L tells him just to walk out the front. And then this happens. Okay, so why is the music telling us that this scene is so epic? One thing is the scale, but what is even more pivotal is what is happening amongst the characters and the story. Soichiro is not just realizing how many resources L has at his disposal, but he is also realizing the fact that L would risk it all to get Soichiro out alive. It's a moment of success, a victory for the police, because they have managed to turn the public against Kira. It is a moment that doesn't just progress their mission, but also strengthens the bonds between them. Anime opening and ending themes feels like a different realm altogether, but when talking about indicators, then I can't help but to quickly talk about when anime uses their openings or endings as background music in the actual episodes. When watching an anime series, the openings and endings becomes part of the series' aesthetic. It's something we associate with the anime as a whole, so when they start playing during an episode, it becomes an emotional indicator. Kuroko no Basket did this to create excitement. And Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood did it to create euphoria or sorrow. Counterpoint music is a musical term that is broad in its meaning. Within the context of movies and anime, the term is sometimes used to describe when the emotions expressed by a song and in a scene are opposite. So basically sad music playing during a happy scene and vice versa. Now, I'm no shrink and my exes would probably all agree that I don't know much about feelings, so I cannot explain the psychological mechanics as to why exactly a sad song should work during a happy scene. I find it effective because it can feel jarring, like something is wrong or off, which could very well be the intention of a scene. I think that every song has a slice of melancholy in it, and that is shown during this pivotal scene of Metropolis, where a happy song about love plays during a time of crumble and despair. Sometimes a song is picked that makes us question whether the director just got his soundtrack confused with whatever song he had on their personal playlist at the time. We don't know why the song was picked or why it worked. All we know is that what is unfolding in the scene is ambiguously perfect. Okay, you already know that End of Evangelion is the perfect example of this. End of Evangelion is a movie that opens with a boy masturbating over the body of his comatose friend. It is aggressive, it's harsh, it's cerebral and abstract, and when humanity is literally being consumed by a gigantic naked goddess, what plays during the scene is Come Susatat, a song that mostly resembles something that the early Carpenters could have written. It can't work, it shouldn't work, but it does, and that is the slice of genius that does not happen often. We've talked about music as amplifiers, music as mood setters, and as indicators. Let's talk a bit about when it actually narrates the story, or at the very least helps it along. It's sometimes done by using a piece of music that has a pre-established story and or meaning behind it. A good example is in the movie The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, where Erik Saate's compositions Je m'appelle Non Sillon and Je te veux are all used. There is a lot of speculation as to what inspired these three compositions, but it's a general consensus that it's about the dance and struggle between lovers, and about a woman's dearest wish to being with her beloved, which, if you have watched the film, makes perfectly sense. Another way of using music to narrate the story is by literally having words in it. Yes, we are talking about lyrics. To some composers, instrumental tracks aren't just enough, so they bring in vocalists to add something extra. This, when used properly, can affect a scene and help the narrative along. This happens in Darker Than Black to showcase indifferent sorrow. It happens in Space Dandy in several ways, like in this episode where it expresses romance. And it happens in Kekai Sensen, where it describes a flirtatious relationship that we haven't really seen much of on screen. And I don't think anybody can forget about this one. Let's wrap this up by talking about when music transcends and becomes more than something supplementary. So far, we have been talking about different scenes, sequences, or whole anime that were either changed, strengthened, or completed by the aid of music. But if we're being completely honest here, all of those scenes could still technically work if you hit the mute button, albeit they'd be much worse or just misrepresented altogether. Now I would like to talk about when music is not just helping the story, it is the story. But what would something like that even look like? These are the moments where one or more of the characters takes the stage and starts playing a piece of music that the anime doesn't skip or heavily cuts through. This happens mostly in the modestly sized music genre, like in Kids on the Slope, in Nana, or in Nodame Cantabile, but it's also to be found elsewhere, like in Joe's concert for his sister in Rainbow, Haruhi performing God Knows, in The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, or Masami playing My Song in Angel Beats. These are moments where the very act of playing and listening to the music doesn't just tell the story, it drives it and progresses it. Maybe the song itself has a subtextual meaning that reflects upon the plot or the characters, or maybe the act of playing the music itself allows for the players to develop. Let's look into the show Your Lie in April, which pretty much does this all the time. Kaori performing the Kreutzer Sonata showcases her relationship with music as well as her free-spirited, impulsive character. She's also shown in a much more mature and beautiful light, which is important because we need to understand why Kosei would fall for her. Kaori and Kosei's first duet presents us to Kosei's depression, Kaori's affection, and foreshadows their relationship both off and on stage. Kosei performing Love's Sorrow is a harsh battle against depression, trauma, and loneliness to achieve redemption, introspection, and acceptance. It is basically a performance of grief. Nagi Aiza and Kosei performing the duet The Sleeping Beauty is about student-teacher relationships, adolescence, and about finding your own way, and about how the best way to prove something to others is to prove it to yourself first. I would strongly recommend you to watch the anime to get the full gist of what I'm talking about. Music is one of several dynamics in the anime experience. That does not mean it necessarily has to be spectacular, but it does mean that it can be. If there is one thing I hope you'll take away from this video, it is that point. I am not going to tell you that your least favorite anime is suddenly worth rewatching because it had good songs in it. In fact, it kind of breaks my heart when unpolished or poorly directed anime gets a spectacular soundtrack, because the music is sort of forgotten alongside the anime, and I think that is a shame. I've been in several conversations where someone talks about how awful an anime is, and I reply with, sure, but the music was great, wasn't it? And they just stared ambiguously at me with an expression of, who even cares? You definitely don't have to care about the music in anime, but now I've put my best effort in expressing why and that I do.